Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get started. So, hello everybody. My name is Kent C. Dodds, and I am excited to be here to talk with you about Angular formally. Do you guys mind if I take a selfie with you really quick? I try to do this with my talks sometimes because it makes it kind of fun. Cheese. Thank you. I put it in my slides because I always forget. It's almost lunchtime, we're all tired, and so we're going to wake up together, and I'd like everybody to please stand up. The real Slim Shady, please, no, just kidding. So we're going to do air squats. So that's an air squat. You put your hands out in front of you, you go down and back up, that's an air squat. We'll do 12, and we'll count together. Ready? 1, 2, 3, good job. 4, 5, 6, we're halfway. 7, 8, you're feeling awake. 9, 10, 11, and 12. Thank you so much. That loosens me up and it makes me feel like closer to you all because now we've exercised together, so we're buddies. I'll see you at the gym next week. Yeah, I should have done that, right? Should have given somebody a warning to get that. I guess we got it on video. So again, my name is Kent C. Dodds, and I have a beautiful family. We have 2 kids and another one on the way next month, another boy. So it's great. I work at a company called Alianza. We're a voice over IP platform. I do the front end for them, and it's in Angular, and it uses Angular formally a lot. Does anybody recognize this logo? This one right here. Yeah, Angular Air. I'll give you a sticker after. So Angular Air is a Hangouts on Air video broadcast podcast that I host weekly. And it's great. And if you're into Angular, you should check it out. And then who recognizes this logo? Egghead, yeah. So most of you probably have seen this before. I'm an Egghead author. I have lessons on Angular and JavaScript and Webpack and React and how to brush your teeth. No, just kidding. So enough about me. What is Angular formally? I should also mention I want to finish my presentation with enough time, maybe 5 minutes or maybe even more, for you all to ask me questions about Angular formally at the end. So be formulating your questions and keep them in mind. And then I'll give you time to ask at the end, or you can come and chat with me after the conference. So Angular formally, the basic idea is to take your HTML code for your forms, which, I mean, this is a familiar site, right? You've got tons of attributes and different tags for your forms, and make it a lot more manageable with something more like this, where you just have your single directive, you specify a model for it, and then you specify your fields. And it's this fields piece that is where the JavaScript comes in to power your form. And so you configure your form with JavaScript, and JavaScript is really powerful, much more powerful than HTML, and you're able to keep your code dry by using JavaScript as opposed to HTML. Granted, we do have directives, but I'm going to address that also. So it brings a lot of really awesome IDE things to your Angular applications, but that's all just marketing speak. So let's take a look at what this actually means. So some of you might be thinking, I'd be really surprised if you're thinking this, but you might be thinking, I really like HTML. Why would you ever take HTML out of my forms? And I'm going to convince you that maybe you don't, or you don't realize that there's actually a better way. So I'm going to take you through a scenario. Your boss comes to you and says, I need an input field for people to enter their first name. And so you say, great, here's your input field, and that's my deliverable. And we're going to iterate on this. And so the boss says, that's not very user-friendly. I mean, I'm no designer or anything, but I could use a label. And so you say, OK, I'll add a label. And then the accessibility guru of the company comes in and says, hey, that's not really accessible. The screen reader can't associate those two together. And so you add an ID and a for to associate the label with the input. And now, just from this, you have to keep in your head, okay, I can't have any other input on the page or anything else that has an ID of name. Just remember that. And then your designer comes to you and says, hey, this looks like junk. We use Bootstrap. Could you add some classes? And so you do. And then somebody says, I want to reuse that thing that you created. Could I copy and paste? And you say, no, I am a smart Angular developer. I will not copy paste code. I will instead create a directive, and you can use my directive. And so you create this directive, and you realize, oh, great, I can actually generate the ID. So now I don't have to worry about making sure that's unique. That's nice. But you have this enormous directive configuration object that you have to define just to have a simple input field. And then somebody comes, and people start using this input field, and they think it's awesome. And then somebody says, I need that input field to be required sometimes. So could you make that required? And so you say, yeah, sure. I'll just add ng required. And you just put the required attribute on there if you want it to be required. OK, that's great. You've run into a problem. Now all of the 20 other places that this directive is living adds an extra watcher when only one of them actually needs it to be required in some cases. And so this is not a good thing, especially when somebody needs it to have a max length or a min length or be disabled sometimes. You start adding these different directives to your directive, and then you start thinking, maybe I should split this out into multiple directives to deal with these different cases. And there are other ways to accomplish these challenges, but the basic idea that I'm trying to express is that there is just so much boilerplate associated with having or dealing with forms that there has to be a better way, and there really is. And then, we're not even done here yet. I'm not done convincing you. We need to add validation to all of these, and so you need to create a validator directive, right? And then you have just this attribute that you tack on to add validation. And then you have to update everywhere that uses this validation. Oh, and then messaging, you have to add that. And it's just your HTML starts to get very big just to deal with these forms. And you have to copy and paste a lot of that HTML because it's HTML. And yeah, gotta love that. So then your designer comes up with this brilliant idea and says, yeah, we're getting off Bootstrap, we're getting off whatever else, we're totally changing everything. And that makes developers feel a little bit like this. And I forgot to hook up audio. But you know what he's saying. And this is your PM saying, you can do this. And this is you. I can't. Stop, please. So it really doesn't have to be this way. And even Yoda, sort of, says that coding forms without Angular formally leads to anger, and anger leads to hate, and hate leads to suffering. So endorsed by Yoda. So let's go ahead and look at some code, and hopefully this goes well. So here we have a form, and we're going to take it from just raw HTML to Angular formally, and hopefully this will be instructive to help you see what it takes to actually write a form in Angular formally, and also compare and see the differences and benefits associated with moving your form configuration to JavaScript. So let me just make sure I'm in the right place. So I have Git branches for every step of this. So if I mess things up terribly, I'll just say, forget it, and we'll move on to the rest of our stuff. So when you want to bring in Angular formally, let me first also show you. This is the wall of text that I screenshotted a while ago. HTML forms for the win, right? And I'll just give a quick intro to what this form is. And what it does. It's totally broken right now. What on earth? Wow, that is so awesome. Okay. Thank you, Internet. There we go. Whew. Man, that was close. I knew I shouldn't have practiced last minute again. Okay. So basically, this is a lightsaber order form. You fill out some of your information and you submit, and you can get a lightsaber as soon as we invent them. So I don't want to fill out this form every time, so I have this little secret controls that I click that and it pops up and I can autofill. So I hit submit, and there's our submission. So there's one really cool thing about this is we have validation already in place, and it says, hey, this field must match the other. Well, what other? I don't know. It just needs to match the other one. And we can also have like this field is required. So we have these cool validation messages. This is totally works, but it's totally not maintainable, and that's why we're switching to Formally. So what you need to do when you start with Formally is you can get Angular Formally from npm, Bower, or download the script. And so Angular Formally has one dependency, and it's called API check. So I've got that installed in my node modules. API check, dist, API check. And who here has ever dabbled in React before? Good for you. React is awesome. Angular is also awesome. So of you who have dabbled in React, who knows what prop types is? Okay, prop types totally rocks. It's probably like up there in the top 5 features that I love about React. But basically, prop types is something like, in React you have components, in Angular you have directives, and here we have a directive that has a scope. So if we had prop types, the concept of prop types in Angular, then we would have something like this. So we'd say the my messages attribute is like react.prop types.string, or an object with a shape, or an object that conforms to this shape. It has a name, and that is a string. Does that make sense, what that basically is? And so what that does is it validates that whoever is using your directive, or in React, validates whoever's using your component is using it properly. And Angular Formally does this with API check. It's a library that I wrote because I love prop types. And it's for vanilla.js, so it has no dependencies at all. And you can use it in your projects, and Angular Formally uses it heavily. And so the idea is to help you, as you're developing with Angular Formally, learn how to use it, because Angular Formally will tell you in the console, hey, you're using it wrong. So fewer trips to the documentation. Okay, so then we need to include Angular Formally itself. So we'll just do node modules, Angular Formally, dist, Angular Formally, or actually it's Formally.js. And then there's one other thing that we need to include. Angular Formally has no concept of templates whatsoever. It doesn't know anything about what an input looks like or a text area looks like. All of that has been pushed off to you as the developer or to other template libraries. And so because Formally doesn't really care about your CSS framework, it doesn't care about your own custom CSS stuff that you do. Formally is more concerned about taking a template, modifying it to whatever's needed for the configuration of a field, and then sticking it into the DOM. So there are libraries for Bootstrap, and material design is there's support with the Lumix framework, and work on the Angular material, and then Foundation and Ionic, several others. And so we're going to use the Twitter Bootstrap one. And so that's in node modules, Angular Formally templates Bootstrap, and Angular Formally templates Bootstrap. Okay, so now we have all the scripts on the page that we need. Now let's go ahead into our index.js, and we'll add the modules that we need, so Formally and Formally Bootstrap. And now we have access to the Formally form directive and all of the types or the templates that are defined by Formally Bootstrap. So let's go ahead and come up here to the top, and right above the original form we'll add our new form, and we'll say that's a better lightsaber order form. And in here, the basic idea will be very much the same. We still have a form, and we still have a submit button right here, but we're going to add a Formally form. And so Formally form transcludes. It really doesn't matter all that much, so I just do it for fun. And then we'll provide our model. And we want the old form and the new form to be bound to the exact same model. And so if we look at the old form and we find all of these ng models. Whoops. It looks like they're all being bound to vm.user. And so that will be our model, will be vm.user. And then we'll have our fields, and we'll assign that to vm.fields. And then we'll provide our form, whoops, not our formally field, but our form. And we don't want to have these two forms named the same because then they would clash on the scope. And so I'm going to rename this user form to formally user form. And we'll pass that in here. So formally knows what form to use for validation. And that's everything that you need in your HTML. You're done typing HTML for now. Okay, so now let's, in our HTML, we define our fields, and we're passing those into the formally form, so we need to actually define what these are in our controller. And so we'll do so here. Fields are an array of objects, and the most simple field is just has a template that says hello Midwest JS. And if we go to our browser and refresh, we have our form with our template. It's actually very handy to have a template option here. You can also specify a template URL. But if you need to have space in your form, like an HR or something, you can just stick it in line, and it'll be compiled out. I highly recommend that you don't abuse this, because formally is for forms, not for rendering random bits of HTML. So what you normally will be doing is you'll specify a type, and those types are defined by this formally bootstrap library. And so if you look at the formally bootstrap library documentation, you will know that it has a type defined called input. And if we save that and refresh, now we have an input field. And so then we want this input field to be bound to the same model as this first name. So if we look at the original form field for that first name, it is first name. So we'll specify the key for this field is first name. We'll refresh here, say hello world. Angular makes me look really good right now. Woo! All right, so now these are bound to the same model, but you'll notice that we're actually getting a warning in here indicating that we're missing a label string, and that is coming from formally bootstrap. Formally bootstrap is able to validate that you're using the type correctly, and if you're not, then a warning will be logged to the console indicating what you're doing wrong with this type. And so because Angular formally core library doesn't really care about the templates or how they're constructed or any of that, it only cares about rendering those templates. And also because Angular formally is interested in validating how you're using Angular formally, it actually validates everything that you have on your configuration object. So for example, if I say, here, let me pick on somebody. What's your name? Keith? Yeah. So if I say Keith rocks, which, right? Unfortunately, Angular formally doesn't like that. And it will indicate to you that you have this extra property, Keith, that's not allowed on a field configuration. And so this way, if you make a misspelling like keys, then Angular formally will say, hey, you misspelled this. It's very, very helpful. But with our templates, they do need some extra configuration, like the label. And so Angular formally says you can also provide a template options object, and all I care about is that it's an object. I don't care what's inside. And then the types, for example, the input type, will validate that the template options has the right stuff inside it. And that's why we're getting that warning indicating that there is a missing label. So if we say template options, label is first name, and we'll refresh, and now we have first name. And no warnings in the console. So we're using this type properly. And finally, this is required. And so let's go ahead and say required is true. And boom, now we have a required field. You'll notice it doesn't have a message. And the reason for that is Angular formally supports Angular 1.2 and up. And Angular 1.2 does not have support for ng messages. Ng messages came in 1.3. And so later I will show you how to add ng messages yourself, and it's crazy easy. And you could, heck, like you could copy paste my implementation, and then all of our messages would look exactly the same. Wouldn't that be cool? It's just like Twitter Bootstrap all over again. Okay, just kidding. Okay, so that's basically the idea for creating your different fields. You have a configuration object. Anything specific for the type goes into template options, and you find that information in the documentation. I'm not going to bore you by doing every single one of these fields, so we're going to jump ahead because there's more to do. So I'm going to check out the next branch, and it's Midwest.js 01, and we'll get rid of all my changes. And if we refresh, we have all of those. I'm a really fast coder because I just check out the next branch, and boom, it's done. So that was like a joke. Like, you can chuckle. It's okay. Like, even just like a little pity laugh or like, anyway. Okay, so now we have all of our fields configured. We have a text area here, nothing special there. We have select here, and we specify our options being these planets, which comes from here. And then we have some radios and other things. So we have this postal code that's of type number and has a pattern of 5 digits. Can you hold it for the end? Thank you. Okay, so now let me just jump into here. We're going to talk about expression properties. So Angular formally tries really, really hard to make sure that it optimizes its what is rendered or what is compiled by Angular, so that you have as few watchers as possible to make your forms as fast as possible. So if we look in here on this last name, let's say that this is really contrived. This would be a terrible user experience. But let's say that we want to disable the last name until you've entered a first name. So first off, to disable a field, you simply say disabled is true. And then you'll go into your form here, and there it's disabled. But that's not dynamic at all. If you look at the DOM, it is simply adding the disabled is true, and there's no ng disabled at all. So we want ours to be dynamic, and so to enable that, we use expression properties. And here the key is the property that you want to set, the dynamic property, and the value is what's called a formally expression. Formally expression is a string or a function, and in the case of expression properties, that function can return a promise, and then whatever's resolved by that promise is what's actually set. And that's really handy for asynchronously loading options for your select. For example, if for this planet we had like a galaxy filter, then you can dynamically load the options for the planet using an expression property and what the galaxy filter is specifying. So anyway, for our case, what we want to make dynamic is this disabled property on the template options. So we'll say template options dot disabled. And for us, it's actually quite simple to represent this as a string, this string being like an Angular expression. And so inside of your expressions, you have access to all the same things you have access to inside of a custom template. And of course, we haven't looked at custom templates, so you'll just have to trust me on this. But one of the things you have access to is the model. So it's the same model that you're binding to here on the formally form. And so we have this model, and it's the user, and we want to disable this when there is no first name. So we'll say first name, and it is disabled when there is no first name. Make sense? So if I refresh here, and then I say Kent or Keith, I got to pick on somebody else, Keith. Sorry. So now it's totally dynamic, and if we look at the DOM, it is now using ng disabled. And so that is what I term as automagical properties, or attributes. And so formally is able to determine whether or not something is going to change and decide which version of that attribute to use so that it can be dynamic or so it's not. There's an API, so you can add your own custom attributes as well. But it supports ng disabled and ng required and ng like a ton of other things. You can also have like on click and on blur and a bunch of other things that all go into your template options, and Angular Formally will optimize all of that for you. But yes, please save your questions because I do want to answer your questions, so like jot it down or something. Okay, so that is the Automagical properties and expression properties. Now let's get into validation. So let me just check out the next branch, Midwest 02. So if we look at, our form, then we have this first name thing that is disabled dynamically. Pretty handy. So for the validation piece, right now, this is a required field, but all we're getting is the red glow, and we want to show a message here. So before I talk about how you add the messages stuff in there, I'm going to talk about how you add the validation, and then we'll get the messages in there. So one thing that we had before was this email address and confirm. If I say A at B and A at C, then I'm going to say these two don't match. That's invalid. And so that actually gets added to the form controller, the ng model controller, to indicate what the actual problem is. And so we're going to add that functionality to our formally stuff. So to be able to do that with our old form is we created a directive. This is very common. Anytime you want to add validation to an Angular form, you have to create a directive. And you add it to the $validators pipeline. Quick survey. How many people are on Angular 1.2? Okay, so you don't, this doesn't, I'm sorry. You can't do this. You have to use the parsers to do this, and it's a little bit more of a complex API. Not terrible, but it's no fun. And has anybody using 1.2 ever tried to use parsers and have asynchronous validation? Like validating with the server that this is unique. If you haven't, that's a pain, and I'm so glad that you haven't had to do that. But Angular formally does that for you, and regardless of what version of Angular that you're using, the API for Angular formally validation is exactly the same, and it takes care of the differences for you. So let's go ahead and validate that this confirm email is equal to the email. To do this, you add a validators property here, and the key is the name of the validator. So similarly down here we had this matches validator. That's the name of this validator. We're going to call this one better matches, and then the value is a formally expression. So again, a string that is evaluated by Angular's parse service, or a function that is invoked by Angular formally. And then if you want this to be asynchronous, then you say async validators, and you can do asynchronous validation as well. So for us, it's very simple. Again, all that we need to check is that the view value for the confirm email property is equal to the model value for the email property. And so one thing that's available in your formally expressions is $view value. That's just a handy shortcut for you because this is so common. And then we say is equal to the email. And if this is true, then our validator passes. If it's not, then we'll get an error. So let's go ahead and save this. And we'll go up here to our top form. We'll say A at B and A at C. And now we get the red glow indicating that there's an error. And if we were to look into it, we'd see it's the better matches validator that's failing. And if I say B, then it's passing. And so that's the idea behind validators. What's really nice is I no longer have to, like, if I have some validator that's just very specific to a specific field, I don't have to create some weird directive somewhere and just hope that directive has been loaded onto the page before I actually use it. And so, yeah, that's nice, I think. So that's how you create validation. But now we need to actually display these validation errors to the user. And I apologize if I'm going really fast. I want to get through all this so you can ask questions. So seriously, write them down. We need to add these messages. So what I'm going to do is I'll just check out the next branch for that. And I'm going to first teach you about the concept of wrappers. So wrappers were created for Angular formally to make it so your templates that you define yourself don't have to repeat themselves all over the place. For example, if we look at our form here, we have labels on all of these, and like some of these are different types as well. So you have the radio and you have the selects and everything. And then also on the old one, we also had a directive for validation. And so there are just common chunks of HTML that apply to several different types. And so you wouldn't want to have those types or templates have the same markup. And so that's what wrappers are for. So we'll go ahead and create another template here with a type of text ng template and ID of formally messages. And then we will, inside of here, we'll just have a pre-tag that just spits out the options so that we can see what that actually looks like. So we'll bind the options and pipe that through JSON. But then something that's required for wrappers is something that's called formally transclude. And that actually has no special meaning. Well, it is required, and it is required to look exactly like this, but it's not actually a directive. This is string replaced. And all that is happening is formally takes the original template and just sticks it right there, replaces the original template with this, and now the template becomes all of that together. So that's how wrappers kind of work. But we need to actually associate this with the wrapper that we'll use in our form. And so we'll say app.run. You can also do this in the config phase. And we'll say formally config. And in here, we're going to add a wrapper. So we'll say formally config.set wrapper as an object. The name, we'll just say formally messages. And the template URL will be formally-messages.html. And then we also, so we have set a wrapper, but we don't want all wrappers to apply to all fields, right? So we have to either associate the wrapper to the fields or the fields to the wrapper. And so you can do this either inside of a specific field. You can say, hey, this field is being wrapped by these wrappers by name. Or when you set up the initial type, you can tell Angular formally what wrappers to use for that type. For example, if we go to the source for Angular formally templates bootstrap, we'll look at the input.js. I haven't explained exactly how you set types, but it's fairly simple. You give it a name, a template, and then you specify your wrappers by name. And so the formally bootstrap templates have the bootstrap label and the has error for that red glow. And so that's how our wrapper could be used. For us, these templates have already been defined, and so we are going to use the other approach where we say inside the wrapper what types this wrapper should wrap. And I feel like I could be a wrapper after saying wrap all the time. Wrapper. Okay, so we'll say types, and we'll pass in the different types that we want this to wrap. So input and radio and select and text area and checkbox. Okay, so now we are wrapping all of those types inside of this wrapper. We're sticking the template right there and then adding a pre to the end of all of our templates. So if we refresh here, we see a pre tag after all of our templates. And so dry code for the win. And now inside of here, these are the options that you are passing to Angular formally, and it attaches a bunch of things onto it to make it easier for you to deal with formally. So this form control is the ng model controller associated with this particular field. And so I say hello world, and you see the view value and model value getting updated. And if there's an error, then you'll see the error required is true getting updated there. So that's just a quick intro to wrappers. Now we're going to change this wrapper to use ng messages. And this part, I think I'm just going to check out that branch, because you can look at it later and there's not a whole lot of explaining that needs to happen. So we'll do that. It's actually, sorry, 4.1. Okay, so basically all that you really need to know is Angular formally, you have that options object in your scope that you can use inside of your wrapper. But there are a couple of shortcuts that Angular formally gives you so that writing wrappers is easier. So you have FC, and that stands for form control. That is the equivalent to that options.formControl that I showed you earlier. So that's the ng model controller for this current field. And so we have the $error, and that's what you pass to ng messages. So if you're not familiar with ng messages, just glaze over this. Copy paste, no big deal. And then we're going to ng repeat over the options.validation.messages. So Angular formally will take all of the messages that could be used for this particular field and attach it onto your options so that you can use it in messaging. The more common case being ng messages like this. Okay, so now if we go to our app, we refresh, we're still not going to get any messages. And that's because even though we are wrapping our templates properly, and see there's the my messages stuff and the ng repeat, Angular formally has not been informed of any of the validation messages that could possibly be shown, what the validation message should say. And so what we used to do is we had this custom messages, and then we'd have an ng message for each one of these, and this is the content of those messages. So what we're going to do now is we're going to inform Angular formally of what those messages should be. And so we'll say formally validation messages. And that is, it has an API that makes things a little bit simpler, but I'll show you the raw stuff at first. So it has a messages property, and this is an object that has a key of the name of the validator, so when that validator is failing, and then the value being a formally expression that is evaluated when that message needs to be shown. So we'll say required. So when it's required, we're going to provide just a string. And again, this is an Angular expression, so we'll put that inside of quotes, and we'll say this is required. And if we refresh, then we'll see this is required pop up, just as it did before. One of the cool things, though, about using these formally expressions is, even though this is kind of a pain to put in quotes, it actually is kind of nice because now we have access to the options, and so we can find out what the label was. And so instead of just simply saying this is required, we could say first name is required and last name is required and email address is required. So to do this, we'd say options, so our field configuration options, and template options, and then label. And we'll just simply say is required. And so first name is required, email is required, and so on. Pretty handy, giving more tips to the user. And then options.templateOptions, because it's a lot to type, can be abbreviated to TO. And so then I'll show you the simpler API. So if you don't really care about having it be an expression that is dependent or that doesn't really need to be evaluated, it's just a string, there's a simpler API that you have available to you called add string message. And so for email, we could just say invalid email. And we could do the same for number. And now say blah, 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 invalid email. And so you configure your validation messages, your more generic validation messages here, and with the formally validation messages, and then you have access to that on your options validation messages if that particular field can show that message. So one final thing is sometimes it's a good idea to have things configured in one place. Other times it's a bad idea because maybe this message is only being shown for a specific field. And so down here in our, let's see, the better matches example for this confirm email, this is the only place this message needs to be shown, or any message whatsoever needs to be shown. And currently, if we say A at B and A at C, we haven't informed Angular formally what message to show, and so therefore no message shows at all. And so because this is specific to this field and this validator, we're going to tell Angular formally, hey, this validator has a message. So we're going to change this into an object that has an expression and a message. And this message is another formally expression. It can be evaluated as a string or a function. I should mention that one huge use case for Angular formally that surprised me was lots of people will take this field configuration object, make it into JSON, and persist it to disk. And that is only possible because of these formally expressions that can be expressed as strings and evaluated by Angular. And so that's why you'll see like really often that we're using formally expressions for a lot of things, just because it's so powerful to be able to do that. So here for our message, what we're going to say, it's actually kind of fancy, we'll say view value is not equal to the model.email. And so we can be very specific to our users what is wrong. So we say A at B and A at C. And A at C is not equal to A at B. And so we know, oh, I need to change that to A at B. And it's also dynamic, which is kind of like, oh, that's cool. Maybe for the first time. Yeah, so that is validators and messages. And like I said, it's very easy to do. Just a quick recap. You create a template somewhere. You can also have it be like an inline template, which is not terribly uncommon. And then you can reference it here. And then you define the types that are associated to the wrapper, or in the types you say that they are wrapped by a specific wrapper, or in the fields. And then you tell Angular formally what messages fields can have, and then you utilize those messages inside your wrapper on the validation messages. So that's pretty neat. Let's check out the next thing, which we already covered, wrappers. Custom templates. So I have time. You will be able to ask questions, I think. So we'll go ahead and check out the next branch. And we'll force that. And yeah, a little bit different, but basically the same. So let's go ahead and say that we found this really cool color picker, and we don't want people to have just such a limitation on their color of their lightsaber, but we want to give them like all the colors that are possible. And so we found this color picker. We're going to use it, and in an effort to avoid problems with the internet, I'm just going to check out the next branch that adds those dependencies for me. So if we refresh the page, everything's busted. Why is it busted? Oh, criminy. Maybe I need to try again. There we go. Whew. Okay, so all that we did was in our index.html, we added AngularJS color picker and tiny color and AngularJS color picker, the module, and then inside of our module dependencies, color picker. So now we can use this the directive that's provided by color picker to create a type that uses this directive, and we can have color pickers in our field configurations all over the place. So to define a type, you say formally config.setType. That's an object. And we'll say the name is color picker. The template will start out with hello, and yep, that'll be it for now. And then we'll go down to our color picker, or what we want to make a color picker, a color preference. We'll say it's color picker. There are no longer options necessary because we don't care. They can choose any color. And if we refresh, what we'll see is hello. So one thing that you'll notice this is missing is, aside from the color picker, of course, is a label. So let's go ahead and add that back in. On our types, so like I said, you can reference wrappers to types or types to wrappers. So in this case, we'll say the wrapper is our bootstrap label. And also, bootstrap has error. So whenever there's an error, it glows red. So now we'll refresh, and it has our label again, hooray. And so now it's time to actually build out our template for this. So our template, we'll just inline it because it's pretty small. And we'll say it's color picker. And we'll give it an ng model. And so we'll take the model that's on our scope in our fields. And then we'll take the options.key, so whatever is specified by the options. And then I'm going to add a couple of attributes that I prefer for this particular implementation of the color picker. So I want my formats to all be hex, because I don't know why I like hex so much better than RGB, but I do. And now if we refresh, we have a color picker, and it totally works, and it's awesome. And it seriously, to get the label, we even have validation, but I'm not actually sure how to, I don't know how to make the color picker invalid. So, but we do have validation, and all of the other things were all just done magically for us, just from this simple set type, and then we use that type throughout our application. And the real win here is that all of our fields are exactly the same throughout our entire app. So no longer do you have the situation where somebody comes to you and says, hey, on this page, this field is broken. Instead, they will come to you, hey, on all the pages, all the fields are broken. And that sounds like a really bad thing, but what's really nice about it is you fix it in one place, and it's fixed everywhere. Instead of, hey, on these 3 pages, that code you copy-pasted that no longer is correct, you need to fix it in all the places that you copy-pasted it to. Terrible, terrible, terrible. But we see that all the time with HTML forms. So that is, I believe, everything that I want to show you. There are more things, and you can go find out more about these things by going to the ng formally, or just search Angular formally, and you will find it. And that's it. So I am open for questions. And just to not make things awkward, or to make things really awkward, I'll ask for applause now, and then we can not worry about it later. So thank you. So I am totally open for questions. Yes? Yeah, totally. So I should have shown this. That's a good question. Angular formally has a website, and I am not a designer. So if any of you are a designer and you're interested, I would love to make this look better. But what's useful about this website is these examples here. So we have this repeating section example where repeating and here you can add, this is an example of investments, somebody made this, and so you can add as many of these as you like. And then there's also nested forms, and so you can have this kind of nesting concept as well. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Sweet. Any other questions? All right, feel free to come down and chat with me if you have any specific questions. And yeah, other than that, enjoy lunch. Thank you.